Hello and welcome to the European Report. In this programme today we'll be discussing the very important issue of what role the EU and what role can the European Parliament play in helping to foster closer political relations with the Israelis and the Palestinians, and we'll also be talking about the potential come September in the United Nations of the UN recognising a unilateral Palestinian state, and we're saying what implications will this have for the Middle East peace process. In today's programme I'm joined by Daphne Friedman, who's the Communications and Campaign Officer for the Europe-Israel Public Affairs, Thomas Sandel, the founder and director of the European Coalition for Israel, partner in crime, and also we are joined by Michael McCann, who heads up Israel-Britain Alliance based in the UK. So welcome to the programme. Firstly, I'll start off with you, Thomas. The French government is very much involved in trying to kickstart the Middle East peace process, to try and push through an agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the French government are trying to achieve, and why aren't they including Israel in these potential peace talks?
Well, thank you, Simon.
Pleasure.
It's great to be back again. And as you know, there was a peace summit planned for the 30th of May, which would have been 2 days ago. And it was postponed, and it's now scheduled for the 3rd of June on Friday. When it comes to the peace negotiations, I think the parameters are always clear. It's more a matter of bringing the parties to the same table, and obviously this is something that has not succeeded in the last few years. And it's understandable that the international community can have a certain level of frustration and try to do their utmost to kickstart the negotiations. Our concern, of course, is that you want to discuss peace in the Middle East without having the two parties at the table. And this was also the objection from the Prime Minister Netanyahu, to say that if we are to discuss peace, obviously, we want to be involved. This should not be a matter for the international community or the French government for that matter. Their game plan, of course, is to say that, listen, we need, as an international community, the quartet and the major players to come together to look again at ways of kickstarting, and then later in the autumn bring the parties together and try to reach an agreement or a timetable during which an agreement would have been achieved. I think as far as the details are concerned, they're not very clear. A lot probably has to do with psychology as well. I think they feel it's good for the overall mode just to see that something is happening.
And Michael, you're here representing Israel-Britain Alliance. Can you tell us about this organisation? And also, do you think that the issue of the Israeli settlements is the key issue that is preventing an agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians?
I don't believe that settlements are the key issue, but I think that every year that passes where the Palestinians don't have a leader that will properly negotiate on their behalf makes it more difficult to find peace. Let's absolutely be clear about this. The idea of bringing forward anything through the United Nations without both parties sitting down at a table and thrashing out all the issues is plain stupid. I don't need to be diplomatic anymore. I'm not a politician. And let's be clear about another issue. The Palestinians refused a state in 1948. The Jordanians and the Egyptians refused to give the Palestinians a state from 48 to 67, and then taking it right through to 2000, when Bill Clinton was tantalisingly close. He said recently he nearly killed himself over giving the Palestinians a state. They refused it again. And let me bring it even more up to date for you. In 2014, when I met with Palestinian Authority ministers and when I met with the PLO, I put this to them. If the Clinton-Arafat-Ehud Barak deal was put back on the table with 2014 prices, would you accept a deal? Silence. And to quote someone from my heritage, Robert Louis Stevenson, who said, "The cruelest lies are often told in silence." And the cruelest lie was told in silence that day, and the people who benefit from the Palestinians not negotiating, or don't benefit, I should say, are the Palestinian people. So therefore, people have to understand the history of this dispute. and why we've now got disputed territories. And bringing in other third parties to try and resolve it without the consent of the two parties who are the most important participants in that discussion is absolute madness.
Absolutely. And Daphne, I want to bring you on board on this one. As you're an Israeli, you have probably a better perspective than any of us, and particularly when it comes to Israelis, that the Israelis would do anything near enough for peace, make any dangerous territorial concessions in order to have a lasting peace with their Palestinian neighbours and other neighbours in the Middle East. What do you think are the key issues that are preventing an agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians?
So, as you say, yeah, I truly believe that Israelis want peace with all their hearts, and we are willing. We did it in the past. We gave a lot for peace, and all we care about is living in peace. I truly believe that Israelis will be willing also to give even part of settlements for the next peace, and it's. Regarding the last question that you were asking, are settlements what's keeping the peace process? I think it's very convenient, both to Palestinians and to other countries that do not support the peace process, to put the issue of settlements in the center. The EU is doing it. It did it a few months ago with labeling. The BDS movement is feeding that. It's very easy to take that and say this is why we don't have peace. But what people forget is the violence that we keep having from Palestinians, the rockets that we have from Gaza. People in Israel don't live in peace. We don't live a normal life. We don't go out to work and know that we will come back in the evening and everything will be fine. We live under terror attacks day by day by day. And the fact that just to come to negotiate, there are some things that we need to do, like stop building. It's absurd. To start negotiate, let's start negotiate. There shouldn't be anything that will stop us to start negotiate. But you can't come to start negotiate on something when one side is deciding on the other side to begin with. So that's the main issue, I think.
Yeah. And Thomas, the main political and legal framework for the peace negotiations has always been based on the Oslo Accord signed between the Israelis government and then the PLO, which became the Palestinian Authority. And the basis of those negotiations was that the EU would do everything they could to help foster good relations between the Israelis and the Palestinians, but essentially it was up to the two sides to make a decision in terms of how far the peace process progresses. Now, surely we've seen over the last decade or so, particularly since the last Intifada in 2000, that there has been a growing reluctance on Israel's side to concede land for peace, primarily out of fear of more terror attacks, and this is what we've seen in Gaza with Israel's unilateral withdrawal from the Gaza Strip in 2005, only to see Hamas take over, which is a proscribed terrorist organisation. So isn't Europe in danger of missing the point of the actual framework by supporting more and more a demand by the Palestinian Authority to create a unilateral Palestinian state outside of the negotiated framework of the peace process?
Well, Simon, you said the word unilateral, and I think that's for me the key ingredient in this equation. And as the Oslo Accords clearly stated, there should be no unilateral actions from either side outside of the framework that was agreed. And this is, of course, what happened just a few years ago at the United Nations. When the Palestinians decided, instead of negotiating, instead of sitting down with the Israelis, to bring this to the United Nations General Assembly. And this is something that we've always been objecting to as a European Coalition for Israel, and state the simple fact that there can only be peace through negotiations, exactly as Michael said. I also think that what you need to put in place is simple benchmarking. Yeah. And I think sometimes Europeans in particular, they live in a dream world, just assuming that the state can be birthed overnight, and that the Palestinian culture as it looks today, with all its incitement and violence, would be reaped for statehood. And this is, to use the language of my friend here, this is clearly nonsense. I had a discussion with the famous historian Andrew Roberts, who said, you know, statehood, yes, but let's use benchmarks. It may be a process of 10 years, it may be a process of 100 years. For Turkey to be accepted just as a EU member state, there was a process of 15 years for Turkey to adopt and become more like a European member state. So I think there needs to be more of a realistic approach to this whole issue of a two-state solution. And benchmarking for me is a crucial ingredient in this equation. And that's why we are so firm on stopping incitement. We want to see some clear signs that the Palestinians are willing to end this conflict once and for all and to live in peace with their Israeli neighbors.
Yep. And Michael, with your former colleagues in the House of Commons, particularly those on the left, are coming to a position where they feel that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has gone on far too long, and the overall answer is to actually concede and put pressure on Israel to actually create a Palestinian state on the ground and support a unilateral Palestinian state, regardless of the security situations that would cause. Now, isn't it a fact that it's thanks to the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, that are actually keeping Mohammed Abbas in power at the moment, and that if Israel makes peace with Abbas today, tomorrow Israel could find that Hamas are in charge of the Palestinian Authority? And what we see with the situation with the rockets and missiles being fired over from Gaza, we would see that situation intensified over the whole nation of Israel. And so therefore, isn't it important that Western leaders and Western politicians look at the security implications on the ground before they decide to support a unilateral Palestinian state?
When you were referring to those people on the left, and as an affliction of people on the extreme left in the UK, they have either willful ignorance or they're just ignorant of the history, how the whole situation came around in the first place. They just simply don't understand it. For me, the prize of statehood was always something that would be available after border security, refugees, incidentally refugees from both sides, because remember, nearly 1 million Jewish people were expelled from Arab and Muslim lands and relocated to Israel, but they don't get the benefits that UNRWA offers to the generations of refugees that have been created way back since the 1940s. So, you know, the people who put forward these arguments don't understand the realpolitik on the ground. In order for peace to have a chance, first of all, we need some tough love given to the Palestinians. And the tough love is this. In Northern Ireland, all the groups had to sign up to the Mitchell Principles, which committed all the parties to exclusively peaceful means of ending political disputes. We need that in terms of the Palestinian Authority. And we also need a decent Palestinian leadership, brave enough to take forward plans for their people. Because at the moment, I heard it described to me recently as Noah's Ark. We've got two of everything. We've got Fatah and Hamas. We've got the two different views in terms of how they should participate in peace. Fatah claim that they're interested in peace. Hamas want Israel wiped off of the face of the world. So that's the difficulties that we face. The Palestinians have never been blessed with a leadership that will properly represent their views, because the vast majority of Palestinians want peace. And going back to the British Parliament, the vote that took place in October 2014 was utterly, utterly worthless. All they try to do is they're participating in a process that Hamas would support, which is salami slicing their way to the conclusion which they want without offering any compromises. And the key compromise that they won't offer is they won't offer non-violence. And they need tough love. They need to be told that we cannot support you if you continue down this path. You're damaging your people's future, and every year that passes, the issues become more difficult to resolve. The issues of settlements, the issue of where the lines will be drawn, the issue of refugees. I was talking to someone at APAC recently in Washington, you know, where there was a fourth generation claiming that it was a Palestinian refugee. It's utter madness. The UNHCR exists to stop refugees, exists to repatriate them to new countries where they can start a new life. UNRWA is the only organisation which we fund as taxpayers, which creates more refugees every year. It is madness. And really someone needs to grab this issue by the scruff of the neck and say enough. let's have a sensible discussion and reach some sensible resolutions to these problems.
Absolutely. And Daphne, I mean, when we look at Israel's, if we look at the Israeli Knesset, the Israeli Parliament, and particularly the Israeli government, it was only since 1997 that a government of the centre-left has taken power in Israel, as Ehud Barak's government. And there's a growing concern, isn't there, amongst ordinary Israelis now, that Israel is living in an increasingly dangerous neighbourhood thanks to the Arab Spring that's become the Arab Winter, with the rise of Islamic extremism right throughout the region. Israel has to deal with now almost a civil war on Israel's northern border with Syria. And also we're seeing the rise of ISIS as well in the Middle East, as well as Israel having to deal with Hamas, Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and who knows what other Iranian-sponsored terrorist organisations are in the region. So can you explain to us really the security dangers for Israel in terms of accepting Europe's proposal of allowing the creation of an independent Palestinian state outside a negotiated agreement?
Well, there's so many problems. I don't know where to start. But Israel is such a tiny country. We have, wherever you look, we have enemies, except of Jordan, which we have kind of good peace with them, and Egypt. We have danger from the north with Lebanon and Syria, of course, and as you mentioned, ISIS. And by the way, ISIS, we can feel it within Israel, because some of Arab Israelis are actually joining ISIS, and that's the latest phenomenon. So we feel danger every day. And with the Palestinian, this is one of the reasons that we even started having some kind of wall between us, or some kind of gates that we can pass things through, or decide who comes in or who comes out. Because even when I was a kid, at the early 80s, there wasn't such a thing, and the Palestinian could come and work in Israel, come back. We had a good relationship. Some of the people I know would go to their markets and buy and come back. All started with the Intifada, and it escalated until what we are experiencing today. And as you said before, it's really hard when you're from outside to understand the reality on the ground. And I understand the willingness of all the world for peace, and everybody really wanting to push for it, and the French and the Arab leagues and everybody else. And it's good. It comes from a good place, but it's really difficult to decide on stuff when you're far away. And whoever wants to initiate something in the Middle East and in Israel specifically needs to come, needs to see the things in his own eyes, needs to learn about it and about the history, as you said, and to talk to politicians and to the people on the ground. Otherwise, you cannot do it by remote control. It does not work.
And Thomas, when it comes down to the kind of issue of Israel, shouldn't Europe make better relations with Israel, primarily because Israel shares the same values as Europe? It is the foundation of our Judeo-Christian heritage. Also, that Israel is not the problem in the Middle East, that Israel is the solution. It is a beacon of light in a growing dark and dangerous region, and Israel is the only true democracy in the Middle East, and the only place where Christianity is actually growing. So isn't it important that maybe our European leaders examine the good role that Israel plays in the Middle East in actually confronting this violent terrorism extremism that we're seeing that's sweeping right across the region?
Absolutely, Simon, and one would think that this would be crystal clear after the recent attacks in Paris and Brussels, and we realize what type of enemy Israel is facing, as Daphne says, every day, and this is only now becoming, clear for us in Europe. We had a conference just the other week where we basically made two statements. One is that Israeli innovations really is a key to promoting peace in the region. It's something that Europe can benefit from, but also more interestingly, Palestinians. And there was a similar conference just yesterday where we were. It was displayed how Israeli innovations are fostering integration in Israel. How Arabs and Palestinians can be helped to start their own companies, and this way really bring the two parties together, not through BDS, not through demonization or trying to isolate and build walls and label Israeli goods. That's not the way. So I think the solutions are very clear, and we need, and I think especially as non-Jews, we have a responsibility in Europe to raise this point and make the choices very clear, to say, either we are looking at more of development as we see in the Middle East. The alternatives are clear, but there is one exception, and that is Israel. As you said, a beacon of light, the only democracy in that region. And it's not rocket science to decide on what side should Israel stand on that issue.
Yeah. And Michael, as a former British member of the British Parliament, you visited high-ranking officials in Lebanon, in Jordan, as well as the Palestinian Authority, and also in Israel. What do you say that Israel has that Israel's Arab neighbours don't have in terms of democracy, freedom of press, freedom of religion?
Everything that we have in our daily lives. We can turn on the television or the radio, and you can hear a vibrant political debate. You can hear people contradicting government ministers. You can hear people challenging government ministers. Israel's a democracy. Israel is entitled to be criticised, just in the same way Britain can be criticised, France can be criticised, and Germany can be criticised. The USA can be criticised. Democracies make mistakes because they're democracies, and that's the important part. But let me tell you, the BDS movement is anti-Palestinian, it's anti-Israeli, and it's anti-peace. And quite frankly, the cause that they claim to represent, to help the Palestinian people, is done a massive disservice by what they're attempting to do. The people in the UK might not know that when they collect a prescription from their doctor, there's a 1 in 6 chance that prescription, that drug, will be made by Teva Pharmaceuticals based in Israel. And there's loads of examples, breakthroughs in Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, dementia, things that my parents, grandparents, people across Europe will benefit from. We should be celebrating Israel every single day, and we should be thankful that we have Israel as a vibrant democracy, which is, quite frankly, if you look at the map, is an arc which is, quite frankly, holding the Middle East together. If that wasn't there, the whole thing would collapse, and it would be even worse for every country in the world.
Yeah. And Daphne, how can Europe play a role in helping to foster closer ties between Israel and our neighbours?
I think Europe can be an amazing actor in the region. It has the power, it has the means, and it has... Europe just needs to be given an equal way of treating both countries. That's the only thing it should do. Because right now, as I said earlier, we had the labeling issue for Israel against settlements, which is fine and it's acceptable. You can argue if it's wrong or right. But nothing has been done to the Palestinian but transferring money, aid money for the Palestinian. And by that, you're basically giving them the wrong message that, and this is the feeling among Israelis, that Europe is right now for the Palestinian. They support the Palestinian more than they support the Israelis and their rights for security. So I do think there is a place for EU to be a player in the peace process between Israelis and Palestinians. I think Israeli would like the EU to take part. But right now they don't trust the EU that much because of the step that I mentioned.
Yeah. So program's come to an end. So I just want to thank you all for being my guests here on the European Report in the European Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I just want to thank you all for watching today's European Report that is recorded in the European Parliament here in Brussels. And as we've been discussing the peace process, it's important that we actually get behind Israel and realise that Israel is the beacon of light and the beacon of liberty in the Middle East. And by supporting Israel, we're supporting the forces of freedom and democracy. And our European leaders would do well to take that into account rather than supporting a unilateral Palestinian state outside of a negotiated agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians, as that won't bring peace, but instead it will create more conflict and war. So I want to thank you for watching today's European Report.